Hello and welcome to this Power BI introduction course. My name is Alan Murray. I am an Excel and Power BI instructor and I will be taking you through this course. We have plenty to cover, so let's have a look at that. The introduction section will see us installing Power BI desktop and having a quick orientation to the screen and some typical default settings. We will then start to look at building our report, which we will do throughout the course. The first thing we need to do is get some data and transform and shape it ready for modelling. Once that's done, we will start relating the tables. We need to create a date table and also choose which fields we will be using in our report. Then it's on to creating some DAX measures. We will be using some DAX in the third module on data modelling, but in module 4 we start to get a little bit more involved. Then it's on to adding the visualizations to our report, which is something that really separates Power BI from Excel. Lots of visualizations that we can use. We will be bringing them into our pages of our report and looking at some of the formatting options available for them. Then we'll talk about some aspects of report design. There are some simple things we can think about to improve how a report looks and feels, and also some built-in settings in Power BI Desktop that we can take advantage of. Next up is the interactions and the filters. We have a lot of options at our disposal. We will be looking at some of the more popular ones, seeing how they're different and how they can be used to make our report work the way we want it to. Then finally, we publish our report to the Power BI service, and we also explore other ways that we could share this report with others, and also how we can access our own report from remote locations. So lots of exciting content to talk about. Let's move into the next lesson where we go into a little bit more detail on what is Power BI. What is Power BI? Power BI is a self-service BI solution provided by Microsoft. It is aimed at the end user who doesn't necessarily have a technical background and know about databases or has experience in programming. It takes the hands out of the IT department or the need to hire a freelancer and enables that general end user who may have a background in Excel to be able to create powerful and interactive reports. There are two parts to Power BI. There is the Power BI desktop, which will form most of this course. That is the software where we create our model and our reports. And then there is powerbi.com, otherwise known as the Power BI service, which is where we publish our reports and we can create dashboards and share it with our audience. It contains functionality for users to be able to interact with our reports, but nowhere near the features that we will have in Power BI Desktop to actually create them. So what makes up Power BI? Well, first of all, it has Power Query. Some of you may have experience of this through Excel, and that will be an advantage to you if you do. It's the same feature and it's available in Power BI for us to import data from a huge variety of sources. There are many connections available and more coming out as we speak. We can use Power Query to transform and shape that data ready to be loaded into the model. Once it's in the data model, we can create our relationships between our tables, which is a much more efficient and effective way of modelling our data versus the classic Excel approach where we would have one large table and we would use formulas like VLOOKUP to fetch data from other places and bring them into that one list ready to analyse on. In Power BI, we will be focusing on coming away from that flat file, that one big list, working with separate tables and relating them. This means we can work with huge volumes of data. We also have DAX, data analysis expressions, a very rich formula language that is constantly growing and allows us, if needed, to create powerful calculations. We then have the powerful reporting features. There are a huge amount of visualizations and even more that we could import into Power BI. And there are also many ways of interacting, filtering and highlighting different areas of our reports. These are all built in, so they do not require huge technical skills to be able to operate. They are fresh out the box so that we can create amazing reports in just a matter of minutes. And then it comes to distributing these reports, and typically it will be published to the service, powerbi.com, for sharing, but it can also be embedded into a website and remain fully interactive, and even more options such as PowerPoint presentations, PDF, or even just sharing the Power BI desktop file itself, just like you would share a Word document, a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet already. So that is Power BI. Let's get into the good stuff. Now that we have spoken about what Power BI is, if you don't already have the software, the next step is to get it. Now, one way that we can do that is navigate to this URL, or just simply type Power BI Desktop into Google, and you will be taken to a page where you can download the software ready for use. That's one approach. An easier way of downloading the software would be to come into the Microsoft Store. So if I click on my Microsoft Store from my Start button, and I can search for the Power BI Desktop app in here. If I click on my search button in the top right corner, type Power BI and give the desktop a click, I already have this software installed. So I can see a launch button where there would have been an install button if I didn't have this software. I can see that the product is already installed on the left as well. And by installing Power BI Desktop, taking this approach, you can be confident that it will constantly update with the new releases that come out regularly. If you're interested, you can also scroll down and find a little bit more information here about what Power BI Desktop is. They have some nice bullet points here mentioning about how you can extend your data model with DAX, and that they have over 100 cutting edge visuals and various information, some of which I've mentioned. And also if you scroll down, you can see some of the more technical details about how much size this will take on your machine. But nice and simple, you can install Power BI Desktop from here and follow along with this course. Let's have a quick little tour of Power BI Desktop before we get a grip of our data and really start having some fun. Now, when you open up Power BI Desktop for the first time, you will encounter this welcome screen. And I wanted to show this screen because it can be quite useful. You have access to recent files that you've been using on the left, and the opportunity to go and get new data or use recent sources in reports. But more importantly, I think, especially when you're starting out, is what's happening in the yellow side. We have some video tutorials, but on the right hand side, we have access to what is new, forums to get assistance from the Power BI community, and also the Power BI blog. And this is important because Power BI is updating very regularly. Every month there are new features to Power BI Desktop, and Microsoft will release a video to tell everybody about these features. But because of this fast evolving software, although that's brilliant as a user that we're getting a more efficient and more powerful piece of software, it does mean that we need to be aware of what's changing, so that if one of our favourite buttons suddenly moves, we know that and we can find it again. Or if there's a new DAX function that's better than the old one, we want to know about it. If you do not want to see this screen anymore, there is a nice tick box at the bottom, so we can ask it not to show this again on startup. But maybe you want to bookmark some of those links first. I can see my name in the top right corner because I am signed in with my Microsoft account. If I close this welcome screen for now, this is Power BI Desktop. We have a ribbon along the top, just like any other Microsoft product, although some of them may have a different name, such as modeling. And we have a view tab, just like any other application, also an insert and a home tab, most important of all. On the left hand side, we have 3 different views. We have a report view, which is the view we are on at the moment, and that is illustrated by that small yellow bar. And a report view is literally a blank canvas so that we can insert and arrange our visualizations and other tiles into a stunning looking report. It has some pages at the bottom, just like you would have different sheets of an Excel workbook, and we start off with 1 page to our report. And on the far right hand side, there are 3 different panes by default. There's a filters pane with some really useful filtering options that we will be looking at. We have a visualizations pane with access to a variety of visuals such as cards and charts and maps and slicers. Underneath that, we have a fields and a formatting icon that will provide options for us to work with those visualizations. And this is all theoretical at the moment, but we will be getting our hands on those very soon. We also have a fields pane, and for those of you with some experience of pivot tables in Excel, that will look very familiar. Coming back to the left hand side, that was the report view. But we also have this data view. And at the moment it does not look like much because we don't have any data. But you will see a formula bar along the top, which you'll recognise. And when we do have data, this will look like Excel. We will see our data structured as a table. We also have a field list on the right hand side, just like the previous view. We then have this model view, and this is a really useful view. Once again, it doesn't look like much, although we do have a nice diagram illustrating what it's used for. And we will primarily be using this view to establish the relationships between our different tables and to be able to manage them moving forward. But there's also a lot of other cool things we can do in this view. And over on the right hand side, we have the fields pane again, and we also have a properties pane, which we will be using in this course. I'll come back to the report view, which is the main view of Power BI Desktop, but all three of those have their uses and we will be making the most of them. Before we go any further, I'm going to save this blank file ready for when we start importing our data and creating our model. So just like any other Microsoft file, I can click on File and Save As. And from this typical looking Save As screen, I will navigate to the Documents folder where I'm going to save this, give it a nice file name such as Power BI Course. And you can see it has a .pbix extension. So a Power BI file is just like any other file, and anybody I share it with can also open it in Power BI Desktop. If I click on Save, and we have our new Power BI file ready to work with. Hello, in this lesson I wanted to explore some of the default Power BI options and those of particular interest. So if I click on File and come down to Options and Settings, and then from here Options. And there's quite a lot to see in here, but I wanted to look at 3 different categories. And I wanted to begin with the preview features in this global section. So any changes we make here affects your Power BI desktop installation and how any files that you create will behave. And if I click on preview features, this is what it looks like at the time of recording, which is April 2020. And I've already mentioned in a previous lesson how Power BI is constantly being updated. So you can see that I have 3 features enabled here and others that I have not. But these are features that are available for us to try, and they may even change or be removed in future releases, in future updates of Power BI. And I wanted to bring your attention to this because 1, at the time of you watching this video, things may have changed, or you may not be seeing, for example, a ribbon that looks like mine. But I am previewing the updated ribbon. So please expect some changes over time because they are happening for the good. But also, this is an area you can come if you're interested in using some of these features in preview. Now further down this options window, we have the settings for the current file. So any changes in here will only affect this Power BI course file that I saved in the previous lesson. And there's 2 categories I'm interested in here. One is data load, where we have a few checkboxes that are quite commonly referenced by Power BI users. The first one is the type detection, and this is Power Query, which we're going to see in the next module of this course. And Power Query by default automatically detects column types, and it's very good at doing that, so it can be useful. But some people also find it frustrating, so it's quite common for people to come here and uncheck that box. However, I'm going to leave that one checked so that we can see that in action, especially for those of you who may not be so familiar with Power Query. Now in the next section down, we have some settings on relationships, and I am going to uncheck the auto detect new relationships after data is loaded. Once again, Power BI is very good at doing that, very effective at working out the relationships that need to be there. However, I don't want it doing it here. I'm interested in us getting our hands on and creating those relationships ourselves. The next category is the regional settings. And in here, I am set as English United Kingdom because that is where I reside. But this is the locale for how Power BI interprets your numbers, your dates and your times. Now I'm going to leave mine as English UK, but it's worth bearing in mind that just because you might reside in the UK or the US or wherever else, that may not necessarily be the data you work with. Now this is something we can still change in Power BI, so it's not that important that we modify this setting because we could change the locale after import. But if you're regularly receiving data from other countries, so for example, if I'm regularly receiving data that's constructed in a US date format or in a European number format, it would make sense for me to change this setting to work with that data. Because just because I'm in the UK doesn't mean my data is being structured in a UK format. And that would save me some time and potentially some issues. So they are 3 different categories in here, but there's quite a few options that you might be interested in tweaking for your Power BI experience. I'll click OK to confirm the changes that I have made, and let's progress into getting some data. It is now time to get started on our reports. And the first thing we need to do is get some data. And in this first example, I'm going to import multiple CSV files from a folder. And these CSV files contain sales data. So the scenario here is that we have a coffee shop and we have multiple shops around the world in different locations. And the transactional data is in these files. So this is the folder called sales and it's in my documents folder, but for you it will be wherever you have downloaded and saved this material. You can see in here that we have 4 files, all of them are CSVs, and they have a consistent naming of sales and the year. So we have 4 years worth of random and fictional data. Back into Power BI, on the Home tab, if we click on Get Data, this will drop down a list of common data sources, and folder is not on that list. So if I click on More, this will expand into a window with the complete list of data sources. Now we have different categories down the left hand side, but if I just scroll down this all list for a moment, you can see the volume of data sources that you can use in Power BI, and this is constantly growing. We can see PDF in here, and as I move down, some very common data sources that you may use or at least be aware of. So we have Google Analytics, a LinkedIn Sales Navigator, GitHub, and the list goes on and on. So this is really cool, and you might find the software that you use in here ready to rock. If I scroll back up, because folder was near the top of the list, I'll select that and click Connect. First of all, it will ask us to browse or provide the path for that folder. Now mine is on the Documents folder. So if I click on Browse and expand libraries, I can choose Documents, scroll down a little bit, and there is my Sales folder. If I click OK, the path is put into that folder path field, and clicking OK will now connect to that. And we see a window listing all of the files that it can find in that folder. Now in this example, it is only the CSVs. At the bottom, there are a few buttons for some actions. It is always encouraged to go straight for transform data. We will be combining it very soon, but it's always a good habit to click on transform data so you get the opportunity to look at it before you start taking any major steps. We now see the list of files in the Power Query editor. Now, we are not going to spend a huge amount of time on Power Query in this course. For that, if you're new to this tool, you will need to find yourself a Power Query course for some more in-depth information. We will be covering a variety of transformations and Power Query features over the next few lessons, but it's a much larger tool than what we can go into any serious detail in this course. But at this point, if there were files in that folder that we did not want to use, we could filter them out, maybe using the extension column to avoid any PDFs or Excel workbooks that might be in here. For us, we are going to combine it. This is exactly what we want. And there's a button, a double arrow button in the header of the content column. And if I click on that, it's going to open up all 4 of those files and stack them into one big list. We get this window first giving us an insight to those files. We are happy with this. If I click OK, it's going to take a little while to combine those, and we get that complete list. We have the name of the file in the first column, and then we have the order ID, the date of the transaction, the sale. We have the product, and also in the same column, the name of the shop's location, and then the country code for the country that shop resides in, or that location is found in. We then have the all-important amount. Now, the file name in the first column can be very useful in analysis sometimes, but for us right now, it's not needed. I don't need the year in its name because I have the year in the date field. So I'm simply going to right mouse click on that column and remove it. Now, in Power Query, on the right hand side, as we go through these transformations, we have an applied steps pane listing every step that we take. So in the future, when we have our report going, we can just refresh this and every step is updated. Power Query is absolutely amazing. Now, there's a lot of steps in there at the moment. We don't need to worry about any of them really, apart from the source and then the remove columns, which we just performed ourselves, because those steps were done by the importing from a folder and then the combining into one list. And Power Query did it so that we don't have to worry about it. If I was to make a mistake and I realised that I don't want to remove that column really, I could just click on that small black X next to that step and it is removed. And that is your undo button of Power Query. On the far left, we have a queries pane. And once again, there's a lot of queries because Power Query generated those when it combined the files. The only one that we're interested in as part of this course, because we can't go into that detail, is the sales query. Now, to carry on through some transformations, we can see we have a product column and we need to separate the product name and the location of the shop. So I'm going to select the product column and from the Home tab, click on Split Column. There's some really cool options in here, but we want by delimiter. It automatically assesses the column and assumes we want that open bracket, which we do, but I'm going to put a space before it as well, so it removes that space between the product name and the bracket. We then get the option to where to split it at. Will it be each occurrence? I'm going to change that to rightmost delimiter. In this example, it shouldn't make any difference. In fact, I know it makes no difference because there are no other brackets in that column. But I'm choosing rightmost delimiter because if it was to suddenly become an issue, I know the location's on the end of the column, therefore it will be the rightmost. Click OK will perform that split and produce a new column as a result. We now have a product column and this location column. Now I want to remove that closed bracket from the location. So if I select that column, and there's a button called Replace Values nearby that split column button. In here, I will ask it to replace the closed bracket with nothing and click OK, and that bracket is removed. As we go through these steps, on the right hand side, you can see all the applied steps taking place. And you may remember from the previous video on Power BI options, where there was an option to auto detect the data type. And you can see in applied steps, I have 2 change type steps. Nothing that serious, but that was that setting automatically generating these data type changes. And that's why some people like to disable that, so you don't get too many of those. But I've left them there, they're not doing any harm, and I wanted us to see that. I'm now going to rename those columns. If I double click on the first one and call it product, and then double click on the second one and call it location. Now I'm going to double check the data types myself. So although they auto detected it, they may not have it correct. Now the first column, you can see a small icon indicating 1, 2, 3, that is storing whole numbers, and that's great. The second column has a date icon, so that's a date. In product we have text, and location is also text, as is the country code. All of them perfect. Now the final one for amount, that 1.2 indicates a decimal value, which the amount is. But I'm going to click on that little icon because it's actually a button, and that allows us to change that data type. And I'm changing it to a fixed decimal, so that when I click on that, all of the results have 2 decimal places. It's fixed. That now means we have 3 change type steps on the right hand side. The final step in here for the moment is going to be to rename this query. In the properties pane on the right, it's named sales. I'm going to rename that as sales prep, because this is not actually the finished result yet. In a couple of lessons time, we're going to work off this query. This is just the initial preparation. It's not perfect for us yet. So I've named it sales prep, and now I'm going to close and apply to load this into our Power BI model. Close and apply is on the home tab on the very far left. If I click on that, it will take a little while here just to load this into our model, because it's quite a large set of data. And here we have it on the fields list on the right. We can see all the data is loaded. We have our sales prep table, and then its fields. We have a calendar icon next to the date field, and we have this sum icon, this sigma, indicating the numeric fields from that query. Now that is a little over 1 million rows of data. Just to quickly show that off with the first visual of this course, in this visualizations area, if I click on a card icon, that will dump this card tile into our report, and I'm going to drag the order ID field into this fields area to its left. That will count the order IDs by default, just to show that we have loaded 1.2 million rows of data from those 4 CSV files. In this lesson, we are going to import data from 2 more sources. Now the first source will be an Excel workbook. So from the Home tab, I have an Excel button on there ready to be used. So if I click on Excel, the open window appears and is on my documents folder. I can now scroll to the workbook that I need, which is this one called countries. If I select countries and click open, it connects to the Excel workbook and takes me to this navigator window, listing all of the elements within it. And I can see that there is a table named country and also a sheet named sheet 1. Now, if I was to select the country table, I will see a preview on the right hand side, and as you would expect, it is some information about countries. A nice simple table here, but there could have been lots of fields with information about these countries. And these are the countries referenced from the sales data we imported in the previous lesson. If I click on the sheet, I also get a preview of that, and these two elements are showing me the exact same set of data. Now, because I have that data in a table already, it makes sense for me to choose the table over the worksheet. But we could have imported data from a sheet. If I click on transform data at the bottom, I'm pretty confident that this data is ready to be used, but it's always a good practice to click on transform data and check your data out before you load it. So here it is in the Power Query editor. The query is added to the left hand side in the queries pane, and over on the right hand side we have the applied steps and we have the name of the query. I'm just going to put a capital C in the query name there. And in the applied steps, you can see the connection to the source, the navigation to the table, and then the auto detection of change type, which if we look at our data, both columns are text data types, and that's correct. So this query is already ready to be used. No transformations or any other data shaping required. Now I'm going to stay within the Power Query editor, and I'm not going to load this to Power BI yet because there is another data source that we want to connect to. And this one is a text file. So from within Power Query, I can click on the New Source drop down on the Home tab, and I can see text is an option from this list. But just like in the previous lesson, if I needed to connect to a folder or to a PDF or something that is not listed in this quickfire list, I can click on More to get that large complete list that we saw. I'm going to click on text/CSV. That will take me to the Documents folder, and this products file is the one that I want to use. So after selecting, I will click Open. I have this preview of the text file showing me the ID of the product, its name, and then a category that it has been assigned to. Looks great. I'll click on OK. And now it's into Power Query, where if needed, I could perform some transformations. But just like with the Excel workbook, this looks good. On the right hand side, I will capitalize the name of products. And once again, the applied steps, the source, the promotion of the headers, and then that change type step. Now, when you're looking at these applied steps, you can click on them to see what your data look like at that point in time. So I could click on that source step, and in my formula bar above, I can see the file path of that product's file. So if I ever needed to change that for any reason, if that file was to be moved, then I can do so at that source step, and I don't need to recreate this connection all over again. There is also a gear icon to the right of that step name, and rather than editing it in the formula bar, I could click on that gear icon and it would take me to this window where I could then browse for where my new file or where that file may have been moved to. I can click on cancel for now, Not all steps on the right have a gear icon for simple editing, but some of them do. And that can be really useful so that you don't have to redo those steps. As I mentioned, because that source is selected, we are looking at our data in that point in time. So if you look at the data in the middle, you can see the headers are in the first row and not in the header. But then the next step is that Power Query automatically promoted them into the header area. And now in the data, we can see they're in the headers. And then it applied the change type step, which in this example was simply to change the ID into a whole number. It's always good practice to check those data types, and all three of them are good. We have a whole number, text, and then another text field. So I'm happy with this. From the Home tab, we can click Close and Apply to close the editor, load this data into Power BI. And here we have it on the right hand side in the field list. We now have those three tables: country, products, and sales prep. In this lesson, we need to normalize our model. Let's have a look at what I mean. On the Home tab of Power BI, if I click on Transform Data, this will reopen the Power Query editor so that we can see the three queries we currently have, which is sales prep, country, and products. Now, sales prep is our transactional table, otherwise known as the fact table or the data table. This is our large 1.2 million rows of sales over these 4 years. Now, you want to keep these tables as skinny as possible. They're going to be long, especially if you're successful, because we're going to have many sales. But we want as few columns as possible. Now, looking at this table, we have a product, location, and country code columns. Now, the country code column is not necessary. We don't want it in here because we have a location and we can find the country through the location. The product and the location, we do. However, I would like to use some index numbers there as a reference to the product and location, and not the names of them. This will make our fact table fast to interrogate through our DAX formulas and our visualizations. So I want to create a location table. We don't have one at the moment. We have country, we have products, we don't have location. So in the queries pane on the left, I'm going to right mouse click on sales prep, and there is an option to reference this table. There is an option for duplicate and an option for reference. Both of them would work, but it would be better to reference this query because duplicate would duplicate all of those transformation steps plus the connection to the source folder that query does. If I reference it, I get another query from that, but only one of them is connected to that source folder. Now with this new one, I'm going to immediately rename it by right mouse clicking again and renaming, and it's going to be called location. And you can see in the formula bar that the source is just a reference to the other query, equals sales prep. Now if we look at the data, we want this table to be about location. So I'm going to select the location column and hold down Control to select the country column. And with them both selected, I will right mouse click and remove other columns so that we are just left with the location and the country code. Now that we have this, I want to remove the duplicates from location because at the moment we still have those 1.2 million odd rows. So with location selected, on the Home tab, there is a Remove Rows button. There's some really good options in that drop down. The one we want, Remove Duplicates, will strip out all the duplicate mentions of a location, leaving us with our 48 locations. Now that we have that, I want to select the country code column so that next to Remove Rows, I can sort the country code in ascending order, giving us Australia and Austria at the top. Now the location names in this example are unique. There's no duplications, although that is something that can happen. There are towns and cities across the world which share the same name. Here they are unique, but it's good practice to have an index number as a unique identifier. Often your data will already have this index. It will have an employee number or a product code. That's typically generated by a system. Here we don't have that, so I'm going to click on the Add Column tab and then the drop down arrow for Index Column so that I can insert an index column starting from 1. That will include it at the end of our dataset. Here it is. So my next step is to click and drag it to the start, because it's always nice to have your key field as the first column. I'm going to change its name, the header, to Location ID, as a more creative name than index. And then our final step really is just to double check those data types like we do. So the first data type is a decimal number. Now these are whole numbers, so I'm going to click on that and change it to whole number. And then location and country code are text data types, which is great. So all of these steps, just like the previous queries, have been added in applied steps on the right. So if we ever refresh this data, the data will come in from the files in that folder into sales prep, transformations happen, and then this query is linked to that one so that then this table is generated. So now we have our location table. Let's click on Home and then Close and Apply to load it into the Power BI model. And there it is in the fields list on the right hand side. Now that we have that location table, we want to create a new and improved sales fact table. So let's begin by clicking Transform Data to bring us back to the Power Query editor. And we're going to do this by using merge queries, a brilliant feature of Power Query. And on the sales prep table, up in the Home tab, Merge Queries is on the end, and I want to click the drop down arrow so that I can specify to merge queries as a new query. I don't want to affect the current sales prep query because my location query is referencing it from the previous lesson. I want a new query which will be our sales fact query. Now in the merge window, I have the sales prep table selected because I began the merge query from it. But then I have this drop down list where I can specify the location table. So what I want to do here is bring in the location ID from the location query or table so that in the sales table I can remove the location column and also the country column. And the location ID will be used to reference that data. So in the first query, I'm going to select the location column, and then in the second one, select the location column, because at the moment that is being used to join or to identify the data in the two tables. At the bottom of the window, it's just estimating my matches and has confirmed that we have a complete match. Now there are different join kinds available in here, which is not something we're going to get into detail with now. That information will be provided by a more in-depth Power Query course. But this is a very powerful feature with 6 different join kinds. For us right now, the left outer join is what we need. So if I click OK, that will perform the merge and bring the location table into this new query. Now with this table, in the header, there is a button to expand the table data. So if I click on that button, it will ask me what fields from that table would you like. Now we just want location ID. So I'm removing location, removing country code, and also removing the original column name as a prefix. If I click OK, the location ID is brought into this table. Here it is. So I'm going to click and drag that column into position. And then I can select the location column, hold Control and select the country code column, right click and remove them. Because now I have that index, that ID, I can use that to reference the data in the other tables. I don't need them in this big over 1 million row fat table. This is good practice. Keeps our model small and also efficient in respect of our speed of calculations. I now want to repeat that process for the product. I have a product name in here, but I want to replace it with an index number. So this time I'm going to click on the Merge Queries button. I don't want a new one. This time I'm changing the existing query. So if I click Merge Queries, it will open this merge window again. The current merge one table is selected. From the drop down, I'm choosing products, and the match will be the product column in the first table, product column in the second table, and that should return a complete match. There it is. I'll click OK to bring that table into this query, expand the table, and bring in only the ID column. If I click OK and then drag ID before product, it's not necessary to order these columns in this way. I just like the amount column to be the one on the end. I can now remove the product column because I don't need that anymore. That ID will be the reference to that information in the products table. I will rename that header instead of ID, which makes sense in the products table because it's about products. But now I'm in the sales table, I need to be more specific that that is the product ID. Otherwise that could get very confusing. So now we have 3 ID columns in this table. We have the order ID, the identifier of our orders, but then we have product ID and location ID, which are going to become foreign keys for the products and locations table. And we'll see that when we're creating our relationships in a few lessons time. We definitely need to rename this query. So on the right hand side, merge one is not very meaningful or creative. I'm going to call it sales. So now this is the sales table that we'll use. The previous one was just a staging step for the location table and now the new sales table. If I click on close and apply to now load this data into our Power BI model. In this lesson, we are going to prevent our sales prep table from being loaded into Power BI. At the moment, in the field list on the right, we can see the sales table and sales prep. Now, we do not need them both, and although sales prep is not causing any harm, it is creating unnecessary clutter and confusion. And also time loading that into the model when we refresh. So if I click on my Home tab and transform data to go back into that Power Query editor, and in the Queries pane on the left, I'm going to right mouse click on Sales Prep and uncheck the Enable Load. I am warned about possible data loss, and then it may break visuals in my report, but that's not going to be a problem. So I will click on Continue, and the sales prep table on the left is italicized, illustrating that it will not be loaded into the model. So it will still do all the query steps here, everything will still function fine, and the tables that we've got reference in it will function fine. It just won't be loaded into the model, which we're going to work on over the remainder of this course. So if I click Close and Apply, bringing us back to Power BI, and in the field list on the right, we no longer have the sales prep table. Now on our reports page, I can now see something has gone wrong with our visual, which is what I was warned about with that possible data loss warning. So it was correct to warn me. However, that visual is the card that we used in a previous lesson to check the number of rows in our sales data. And I used the sales prep table back then. If I wanted to check it again now, I could select that visual and over on the right hand side remove the current field it's using, which it cannot find because it's not loaded into the model. And I could open up the new sales table and move the order ID back into fields, and now I have the same result as earlier. However, that's not a visual we're going to use, so with it selected, I'm just going to remove it by pressing delete. And we have the data that we're now going to start working on in our model and ultimately our DAX and our visuals. It is now time to create the relationships between the four tables in our model. At the moment, if I was to try and create a visualization that includes data from different tables, it's not going to work. Let me show that. In the visualizations pane, if I bring in a visual such as a table, if I click the table to put that tile onto my page, and then if I open up the products table and I drag the category field into the values area, it successfully lists the 3 different categories of product that we have. If I then drag the amount field from the sales table into values, it doesn't show me the correct value for each category. You can see I've got the same number 4 times. Now the value for the total is correct. 4.3 million, let's call it, is a correct figure. But we've got the same figure for the categories. It doesn't understand how to filter that total for pastries, food and beverages. So it just shows the same total. Now that is because we don't have a relationship between the 2 tables, providing that filter context through the category and then into that fact table for the correct totals. So let me leave the visual there, but switch to the model view on the left hand side. If I click on model, here is our model view. Looks a little bit messy to begin with because for some reason the tables are always all over the place. So in addition to creating relationships, one of the first jobs is just to drag these into some kind of meaningful position. So I can just drag them using their headers into view. Let me scroll over for the sales one. And you can position these how you like. But there are some quite common ways of positioning these tables. And I'm taking this approach of having the sales table, our fact table, our data table at the bottom, and then the lookup tables, also known as your dimension tables, up above. Now let me move products over to the right so that location is next to country because they are related, like this. And now we can create the relationships. Now there's a few different ways of doing this, but the easiest way is just to drag between the two fields of the tables. So for example, to create a relationship between sales and products, the common identifier is that ID, or in sales it's known as the product ID. So from the sales table, I'll hover my mouse over product ID, so I have that grey background, click and drag up to the ID column in products, which is the unique identifier that we created, and release my mouse, and there is the relationship. We have a one-to-many relationship from the products table of lookup into the sales table. A product can be sold many times. The ID is unique in products, but it's not in sales. And we also have this arrow on the line indicating the filter direction. So in the visual that we created previously, it will filter the category in products to pastries, food and beverages, and then produce the right total in sales. So if we wanted to check that out now, if I switch back to report view, it's working brilliantly. We now have the correct totals. Let's go back into our model view to create the other relationships. So for this next one, I'm going to drag from the location ID field in sales up to the location table, and it will correctly establish that there's a relationship between location ID and location ID. Once again, a one-to-many relationship. It filters through locations into sales. I can then create a relationship between location and country. If I click and drag from country code in location to country code in country, I now have a one-to-many relationship there as well, because a country can have many locations. Some of them only have one, most of them have more than one location. If I hover my mouse over any of these relationship lines, it highlights the two key fields. So you can do that to double check that Power BI is using the right fields. You will certainly notice when you try and use them in the visual, like we have at the moment with our category sales. I know this product is working because of that visual, but just hovering over is a nice peace of mind illustration. We also have a Manage Relationships button up on the Home tab, and if I clicked on that button, this will also provide information on those existing relationships, and also the opportunity at the bottom to delete, edit, or even ask Power BI to auto-detect them so that we don't have to create them ourselves. But bear in mind, it might make mistakes. So it's nice to be hands-on and set this up, because if these don't work, then neither will our DAX or our visualizations effectively. I'm going to close this window, and that is our relationships done. We have one more lookup table which I would like to add to our model. And that is a dates table. There are three main reasons why your model should have a dates table. Reason number one is that whenever we use a date in a visual or in a DAX formula, Power BI creates an invisible date table on the fly. Now, by creating our own date table and marking it as one, Power BI knows what to use. That then means that we can write more powerful DAX time intelligence formulas because we will have the information to work with them. The third reason is that by creating our own dates table, we can create the fields which we would like to use in our report. At the moment, the only date column we have are the dates of the orders in the sales table. But we might want to do analysis on the day of the week or on a financial year. And this is information which we don't actually have at the moment. We only have the order date. But we can create these fields, these columns, in our dates table, ready for the analysis. Now we are going to create this dates table using DAX, the data analysis expressions formula language. So I'm going to click on data view, and in here we are going to create a new table. And there's a button for new table up on the ribbon, which as I move my mouse over it, tells me to write a DAX expression to create the new table. Let's give it a click, and it simply opens up the formula bar. Now our dates table needs to include every single date within the range that our model uses. So for example, we have the dates in the sales table. There may be dates in that table where we didn't sell anything, but they must be included in this dates table. Every single date within the range that our model uses. Our model does not have any future dates because we only have a date of a sale. But you may be working with a model that does have future dates, such as expiry dates of something or expected delivery dates, and we need to take this into account. So I'm going to write a DAX formula to bring a list of every single date within all the years of our model. Now I know that this one goes from 2016 to 2019 because that's the data we imported earlier, but I want this to be dynamic. When somebody adds 2020 as a CSV file, this formula has to pick it up. Let's start with the name of our table, and I'm simply going to call it dates. Equals. And as soon as I put that in, a list of DAX functions appear. I can also see the country table in that list. So we get this IntelliSense list, just like Excel, when you're writing your formulas and functions. Now DAX is such a large and rich language, we are merely touching the fringes of it in this course. This is not a DAX course, it's a Power BI course. So although we're going to write some DAX here, we're also going to do more in the following module. In the grand scheme of things, it is just a finger prick of what is possible. The function we need right now though is one called calendar. And this function returns a table, which is important because we're creating a new table, of all the dates between a start date and end date. So if I press my tab key to finish that off. Now a great thing in that formula bar is that we can zoom it in. So it does appear a little bit small on your screen. I can hold down the control key on the keyboard and roll my mouse wheel up, and that formula bar gets larger and helps us see what's going on a little bit easier. Now the start date is what we need to find out, and I want this to be dynamic. I know it's 2016 in this example, but you may have models that are rolling with time and you need that dynamism. So I'm going to start with the date function and open that up. So it prompts for the year, month, day of a date. And for the year, I'm going to use the year function of the minimum date. So I'm going to type min. That will prompt me for a column name of which to find the smallest number, the minimum number. And I'm going to reference the sales table and the date column. Now, for any of you who have written Excel formulas working with tables in Excel before, this is going to look very familiar. If you haven't, this may look a little bit different. There are similarities, but there's also more differences to what you might be used to. So we have the sales table and then a column name with square brackets around it, and that's the notation. I'm going to select that and then close off the min function, return the smallest number, i.e. the earliest date, another close bracket for year to extract the year from that. Comma then prompts me for the month. The month is 1, comma, the day is 1, close bracket for date. So that is the 1st of January of the earliest year in our data set. I can now put in a comma and repeat that behaviour for the end date, but this time using the max function. So it's date, what's the year? Well, it's the year of the maximum date from that sales date column, comma, the month is 12, the day is 31, and then I'll close off that date function and close off the calendar function. So I've given it a dynamic start and end date by simply finding the smallest and largest numbers in the dates column and extracting the years from them. And there are various techniques for doing this. You can also do this in Power Query. I've decided on a DAX approach. When I press enter, it returns a table, which will essentially be a list of all of the dates in that range. Now at the moment, I'm on my country table. That does not look like dates. So I will click on the dates table on the far right. And there we have it. Starting from the 1st of Jan 2016 all the way to the 31st of December 2019. And in the bottom right, it tells me that there are 1,461 rows in this data. Now I can see it's brought back the date and also the time. So I'm going to select that column. And on the ribbon above, I'm going to specify that I only want the date data type. In this model, we are not working with any time, so it's not important for us. I could, if I wanted as well, specify some formatting up here. So at the moment it's got the 1st of January 2016. I could use this drop down and change the format. So maybe I'll switch it to a classic DDMMYY format as we use here in the UK. And there we have it. But regardless of your formatting, we have that list of dates and it is dynamic. In the next video, we're going to start adding the additional columns to this dates table that we may use in our analysis. In this lesson, we will create the additional columns in our dates table that we may want to use in our report. Now we're going to be using DAX here, creating calculated columns. There are two main types of DAX formula: calculated columns, which we're using now, and measures, which we cover in the next module. So let's look at these calculated columns. We've seen a DAX formula returning that list of dates, that table. And if I return back to the Home tab, there is also a button for New Column. So if I click on that, now we need to use DAX for a column, much the same way as the previous one. Now this first one will be for the year. So I'm going to call it year equals, and nice and easy, it's going to be the year function, and I'm going to use the date column that we just created. Now, even though the date column is right next to where we are right now, I'm going to reference the dates table and then the date column. And that may sound a little bit strange. Why I mention the dates table? Because we are in the dates table right now. Why does that benefit us? Why should we bother? Well, the way that the date field looks, with the square brackets around it, is exactly the same as what a measure looks like. And we'll see that in the next module. For the moment, just take my word for that. So because they look the same, it's always encouraged to put the table name before the column name, because then people looking at your DAX will know it's a column and not confuse it for a measure. So it's date, close bracket, and that, when I hit enter, will return the years from the column next to it. Let's go for another new column. We've got a few to add here. Next column is going to be for the month. Now I'm going to call it month number, because that's what it's going to do. And we're going to use the month function. Probably no surprise there. And it's dates table date column. Very similar to before, so going through at a reasonable speed. And now we have the month numbers. Now the next column is going to be something a little bit different, because this time I want the month name, such as January, April. Now for this one, I'm going to use a function called format, which converts a value to text in a specified number format. And the value is going to be the dates table date column again, comma, but the format will be to show the word. So I'm going to open up some double quotes and put 3 M's in there. Now if I put 4 M's, it will be January and September. But when it comes to the report, I don't really need the full month name. And often we're trying to conserve space, so the 3 letters will suffice. Just to demonstrate this, if I do put 4 M's in, close off those quotes, close bracket and enter, then we will get the complete name. But if I select that column, take out one of those M's and press enter, now we have the shortened name, and that's what I want. We could, if we wanted, create 2 columns, one with the short version and one with the long version. But that will do for now. It's new column. So now we want the day. So I'm going to call it day, and it's simply the day function based on that same table we keep using and same column we keep using. So that's the day of the month, like the 1st and the 2nd. What we now want to do though is find the day of the week. And we're going to find the number first of all. So new column. And I'm going to call this one weekday number. And we're going to use a function called weekday. Now the really good thing is that some of the functions we've been using here, like year and month and now weekday, actually exist in Excel as well. So for those of you who may have used these before in your familiarity with Excel, then that certainly helps you pick up that you already know some DAX functions. At the same time, don't worry if you haven't used those or you're not a big Excel user, because we're all learning DAX at the same time here. So it's weekday. Now the date, I think we know what that is. But then when I put in a comma, it will prompt me for what numbering system I want to use. Would I like to use a numbering system that begins from Sunday? Sunday is 1 and Saturday is 7. Well, maybe, but if I move to the next one down, that works with Monday being 1 and Sunday being 7. And that's what I would prefer to use. So I'm going to select that, and that's the second option, so it puts the index of 2 in there. Close bracket and press enter. Brings us the weekday number. So the 1st of January 2016 was a Friday. because the 5th is a Friday. Okay, new column. Next up, we want the weekday name, just like we did with the month. So Friday, Saturday, and I want the shortened version again. So let's call this one weekday name. And the formula will be format on the date column. And the format is going to be 3Ds. Don't forget to use your double quotes around it. So just like we did with a month, that's going to bring back those shortened versions of a weekday name. Now for one final column in here, because we could go on adding quarters and financial quarters and concatenating months and years and lots of other stuff that you do sometimes see people use. They may even have time datas put in here. For us though, I wanted my final calculated column to be an if function, a very popular function, and aside from what we've just been writing, one of the more common uses of a calculated column. Calculated columns are nowhere near as commonly used as the measures we see in the next module. Normally when somebody mentions DAX, they're talking about a measure. But at the moment we are building this table out, so these are calculated columns. So one more column. This one is going to be whether it's a weekday or a weekend. So I want to use the if function to test that if the weekday number is greater than 5, then it's a weekend. I'm using Saturday and Sunday as my weekend dates, which is 6 and 7 numerically. So the column's going to be called is weekend. And I'm just going to display a yes or a no. So if function, the logical test is if in the dates table, remember to reference the table. Let me move down here. What I want, weekday number is greater than 5, comma, display the word yes, comma, display the word no if it is not, the result if false, close off that bracket. And pressing enter, now we have our final column is weekend, where Saturdays and Sundays have a yes, and the Monday to Fridays have a no. And this is our dates table, which has got a few more things to iron out over the next few lessons, and we're good to go to write our measures. In this lesson, we need to solve a problem that we have with the way that our month name and weekday name fields are being sorted. Now let me show you what I mean. If I switch to report view, and if I insert a visual such as a table, and then over in the fields list, if I use the month name in the values area, then you can see that they're not sorted in the correct order. They are sorted in A to Z order, so April's first, followed by August, followed by December. That's not the order months should be in. But Power BI doesn't know that. Software such as Excel knows that because they have a built-in custom list. Power BI does not have that, but we will solve it. Just to demonstrate, if I remove the month name column by clicking the X, and I bring in the weekday name column instead, then we have the same issue. It starts from Friday, followed by Monday, followed by Saturday. So they're in A to Z order and not in the order that weekday names go. So let's switch back to data view, and I'll begin by selecting the month name column. Let's sort that one first, and up on the ribbon go to column tools. In here there's a button called sort by column, and I can select from the list the column to order it by, and this is where we want month number. I can say that those words should be ordered by those index numbers in month number. I can now do the same to the weekday name. If I select weekday name, sort by column, weekday number, and that's why I've used those numeric fields. I could use them in a report, but I'm more likely going to use a word such as March or Sunday. But I've included those numbers in the dates table to drive the order of those names. Now if I switch back to report view, I can see that those weekday names are in order. And if I go and remove weekday name from that visual and add in the month name, then they are also in the correct order. With our date table now set up and working, we need to tell Power BI to use it. And we do that by marking it as a date table. I'm in the report view at the moment, so if I click on data view on the left, make sure that I'm on the dates table, which I am, and in the ribbon, the table tools tab, where we can see the button to mark as date table. If I click on that button and choose to mark this table as the date table, a window will appear prompting me for the column that contains the dates. So from that drop down list provided, I will select the only date column that's in this table, which is date. That is validated successfully, and now I can click OK. And that is done. Now that we have our model set up, in this lesson we are going to hide some of the table fields. At the moment, if we look over to the fields pane on the right and I expand some of the tables, such as sales and products, they contain all of their fields. But not all of these fields are going to be used in our reporting. A lot of those fields are ID fields that were necessary to create those relationships, but I may not be using them in my visuals. So they can be hidden just to declutter that field list and make our lives a little bit easier, which I think everybody appreciates. Now this is easiest done in the model view. So if I switch to model view, so that we can see all the tables already expanded, and we can also select multiple fields at the same time in here. So let's look through our tables. Starting with country, we have the country name and the country code. I think both of those are useful and could be used in reports. But then we have the country code field again in location. And that's important because it's establishing a relationship. But I don't need two country codes. I'm also not interested in the location ID. The location is sufficient here. The ID was just an index that we created in an earlier lesson. So if I click on country code, hold control, select location ID, and I'm going to hide those from the report view. So we're just doing some final tidying up here. We then have the products table, category product and the ID. Once again, I don't need that ID. Let's hide that from the report view. And you can see they have this little icon of an eye crossed out to indicate that they're hidden. Then we have our sales table here. Now a lot of that information can go. I don't need the date or the location ID or the product ID. Indeed, I don't even need the amount. So I'm going to select each of those fields. I'm going to keep the order ID. There's a possibility that an order ID could be used within some kind of visual, but the rest of them I'm going to hide. We don't need the amount field because in the next module we're going to create some measures with all of our calculations. And I'll still be able to reference the amount field. It just won't appear on the right to be used within any tables or any charts. You can always come back here at any time and unhide these fields if it's a mistake at this point. Now, something else we may notice being in here is that our dates table is not connected to any of the other tables. So let me drag it into play a little bit more, and I'm going to click and drag from the date field in sales up to the date field in dates to create that relationship between the two tables. Remember, you can hover your mouse over the relationship line, just clarifying that the two date fields have been used. Within the dates table, I'm going to hide the weekday number and the month number fields. They were important. They enabled us to sort the month name, weekday names in an earlier lessons, but I have no plans to use them in any kind of visual. So our relationships are set up. We've decluttered it by hiding certain fields. So if I was to switch over to the report view, which is where we generally spend our time when we're creating our reports, and over in the field list on the right, if I was to expand the sales table, there is only one field in there, order ID. And if I expanded the dates table, there is no weekday number or month number. So we can still see them in other views, like the model view, but we can't see them in a report view, just giving us a cleaner working area.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get 4 free courses in Excel, QuickBooks, Microsoft Project, and Photoshop, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.